Can everybody see my screen? Yeah, okay, good. So space, new technologies, and sustainability. And we already had a great start in this direction. But I want to take you a little bit back in time about the historical evolution of, let's call it our relationship to space. The very first image, you know, for a long time, right? I mean, you look at Homo sapiens and so on. We looked at space, and we kind of, you know, thought that gods were living in there, and if there is a thunder, then, you know, we definitely did something here that made the gods angry, right? Okay, so that's centuries ago, but this is a very important image. It's actually taken in 1946 on a missile rocket launched in the US from White Sands. And it really is the very first imagery that we collected of our own planet from space. Okay, so probably you've all known about, let me see, about Sputnik in 1957. But actually, 1946, it is my opinion, the year that really marked that the beginning of our relationship with changed relationship with space. So we take Sputnik 1957. Like I said, it's a really how should I say, low resolution for the standards that we have today, right? With TikTok and everything else, a very low resolution image of the Earth horizon, but it really is a beautiful photo. So then, you know, fast forward 1967, the first commercial satellite. Then we jump into the recent era, right? Early 2000s with CubeSats, small sats, etc. Planet Labs was the first company to, are you seeing seeing my screen?
Yes.
Oh, okay, because I thought there was a glitch here. Okay, so Planet Labs was the first company who not only took a CubeSat, well, a couple of U's into space, but they put a camera on it. And then we have SpaceX Starlinks, who's now providing, you know, global connectivity from space. And we will see that in the next decade, there's over 180 companies planning more than 100,000 satellites to be launched into space. This is an amazing evolution, right? But it didn't used to be this way, because originally, and we saw the first images, right, both the V2 rocket and so on were more government military efforts. And the investments in space stem from government budgets. So we were able to grow out in space because, you know, for example, over the past 10 years, space budget amounted almost $200 billion. And they primarily went into areas such as launching satellite operations, then developing the ground segment to enable that communication, deliver those services, and then, you know, deliver services to public. So because the government continued to feed investments into contracts to industry, this value of government investment really has grown in terms of ultimate value delivered back to the public. So we're really talking here about the reason we're here today is decades of government investment, plus, of course, the advancement of a lot of space and terrestrial technologies, miniaturization, automation, AI, machine learning, additive manufacturing, right? And this is what triggers today, this underlies, right? There's all these synergies that underlie this unprecedented diversification and growth of capabilities to access and utilize space. In other words, it's not something funded by the government for the government. It is now opening up to the civil society. So we've been talking, you know, in time about lowering these barriers, and lowering these barriers is having more ability to more options to use what vehicles we choose to go to space with, right? So I'm showing here over the 3 decades, 1990, 2010, 2010, 2015, and 2015, 2020. Initially, we just had government capabilities. And if you were to take a parabolic, a suborbital flight, or an orbital flight, you just had one option in each of these regimes. So now we see today that, there's an explosion, and there's so many companies, from not just SpaceX, who's absolutely the leader in this, but Boeing and Sierra Nevada, Cygnus, Bigelow, etc., right? So we see that the businesses' best practices have also infused themselves into space, in the idea that, instead of trying to de-risk something to 100%, you just stop at some point, you build, you fly, you learn, you upgrade, you build, you do this, you bring a little bit of more trial and error into this whole process. We absolutely, like I said, SpaceX, fast-paced execution, the commercial orbital transportation system model was the first example of a very successful public-private partnership where NASA and SpaceX worked together. And because NASA funded SpaceX, SpaceX was really the leader here, the absolute example to drive and continue to drive increasing frequency of accessing space, and then continuous dropping in price. So by continuing to incentivize these private investments, it drives the market growth, and it lowers the barrier to access space. The other drivers, like I said, is reduce cost. And just to quantify a little bit, it's not just increasing the frequency, but increasing reusability of rockets. Traditionally, you have first stage, second stage, third, there's whatever, the configuration, the architecture is of that launch system. And then, it drops down. Who knows how many there are today on the bottom of the ocean, but you never recover them. And here's where, again, SpaceX took the lead and recovered the first stage, and they're working on to recovering the second stage as well. Not only recovering it, right, but being able, you see this really, really fantastic photo of what they call the grasshopper, right? To be able to reuse this multiple times. So not just one time, multiple time, and then also reuse the Dragon capsule that sits on top of it that goes into space and comes back. So we see the price drop, like when the government used to operate this, we don't even know if this was, it was at least 30,000 per pound to orbit. So that's the reference. I don't know where my unit is here, but it's dollars per pound to orbit. And so that's been going down into 5,000, 1,500. And now with Starship, which is, the huge structure that you've seen Elon build in Boca Chica, it's going to be, it's forecasted to go down to $100 per pound to orbit. So what you can do with that, it's really to the realm of the imagination. Increased access, we're talking about frequency from 1 twice a year to now 3 to 6 to almost monthly flights into space. So I think these are really important drivers. So I mentioned here, yeah, there's, would you mind putting that on mute, please? Thank you. So I talked about miniaturization, right? These small satellites, you saw the CubeSats in the beginning, right? Initially, we were talking about big satellites, takes a lot of cost, takes a lot of effort. These small satellites not only are more space efficient, but they're also more like a puzzle. So if you want to fly something that's to you, then you take one of the two of these units, right? You put them on top of each other, and then you fit what you want to fly in space, whether it is a camera or whether it is synthetic aperture radar, you just fit it in there and then you fly it into space. And again, the versatility and the cost for that really has driven a huge industry in terms of two main new market segments. So while in the early 2000s, we're talking about an emerging economy, today we see two consolidated segments of this economy. Earth observation forecasted to grow to 8 billion by 2027, and space internet, and right now we actually have over 800 Starlink satellites in space. Not only that, but now we see a lot of startups growing in this field, and startups usually are responsible for innovation, for lean models of business. And so only in 2020, the investment, the private investment in space was over $9 billion. Launches, again, I showed you about, I talked to you about the versatility and the reduced price. SpaceX used to capture 25% of global launches, and now, you know, with the new development, the new geopolitical development, I'm sure that that percentage has increased just over the past couple of weeks. So let's see, in interest of time, I'll actually skip this, but I will tell you that the capacity of providing data providing the supply from space in terms of global satellite capacity is forecasted by 2026 to exceed 18,000 gigabytes per second. So this is not just, this is not considering the geo satellites, just low Earth orbit and, you know, some medium Earth orbit constellations. So besides this, I mentioned this Earth observation, right? The way of putting a camera into space. I'll go back to what I started, right, with the first images of space. So particularly during the pandemic, the Earth observation satellites, right, the collection of imagery from space was very powerful, because for a moment in time, human activity slowed down, whether it is in airports, whether it is at the beaches, whether it is just traffic in LA, which is, you know, a reference in its horrendousness. But also, you know, just people traveling. And we've been able to characterize by looking at it from space, right, collecting images from space, this decrease in human activity before and after. And talking about sustainability, right, when you keep on going with the status quo, it's really hard to quantify what is the impact of human activity. But now we do have a reference to say, okay, when we don't act at our max, this is what's happening. So let's talk about pollution levels. Pollution levels dropped significantly. And here's, you know, images in India only within a couple of months apart, you know, before and after the pandemic or the shutdown happened. Same in Italy, especially around heavy populated areas. China, you know, it's not just the CO2 levels, right, but also the nitrogen, the NO2 emissions. So it is very clear that our home planet was able to breathe and come back to life once again. In fact, there are statements from communities living at the bottom of the Himalayas saying, wow, we got to see the tops of the Himalaya again, which apparently they used to be for the past couple of years or decades, you know, covered in smog and fog. And unfortunately, we also were able to capture war. In terms of not only what's going on today, but also in the past, you know, to use this imagery to characterize past war crime or assess and quantify past war crimes. So here's some images. Sorry, let me go back. In terms of this is in blue around the Blue Nile, assessment of the international razing of civilian structures. You know, the Aleppo, the assessment of the Aleppo tragedy in Syria, and more recently, you know, the current situation with you know, with the Russian invasion into Ukraine. So this is actually important, because while it is very, very unfortunate that this war is happening, this is for the first time that what's happening in that war, it's real time propagated everywhere. So there's no room to hide and the evidence that is there. And I think that is a very important element, because a lot of the time people are reluctant to act when they don't know what's happening. But this is something that's out there, and it's put in front of us. And so let's not only talk about the less fortunate things, but let's talk about the moments of inspiration that space gives us. And like I said, not just the commercial, the fact that now the government is not operating government flights to the International Space Station or in space. It literally is, SpaceX is a commercial company, and is providing services to the government, not just to take cargo to the International Space Station, but in the middle of the pandemic, they were able to birth the Dragon capsule to the International Space Station, and we had the first commercial human flights to the International Space Station, which is a huge step forward. I don't know if you know these little details. They always carry, like a little animal. This time, this little dragon was fortunate, and this dragon, when you this little dragon, when you get into space and into microgravity, it starts floating around. So it is, a very high-tech sensor to tell you, hey, you're in space, you're floating. And these moments of inspirations also are starting to build a different understanding and relationship between ourselves and our home planet. So we have the knowledge that we live on a planet in our solar system. And now I think we're in the process of taking that knowledge, filtering it through our human understanding and human emotions, and turning that into an understanding that this is not just a planet, it's a home planet, and it is a very unique place amongst the stars. And we come to the understanding that similarly to the way humans, when humans go to space, right? Astronauts, when they do a walk outside of the International Space Station, they need protection in order to survive, right? You need to have, in all that astronaut costume, you need to have the air, you need to have the thermal protection to ensure that, you're not freezing, right? It gives you a comfortable temperature level. You also need, of course, food. You need to be protected against radiation. You need to be protected about sudden changes in pressure. And you also need to have a way to remove waste, as well as, of course, deal with gravity. Well, it's very similar. There's a very similar picture here with, our planet home. So planet Earth also has the same needs to survive in space. And it's this unique environment that created for itself and for us, from clean water, right? It's a system that's been developed and refined over billions of years to give us for free this environment to help us survive in space without all needing to wear an astronaut costume, right? We talk here about Earth ecosystem services, right? What nature provides us for free. And this is the result of a United Nations Millennium Assessment that preceded the Sustainable Development Goals. So this was a massive assessment, global assessment, where literally thousands of scientists around the globe came to the understanding. So they looked at all these Earth ecosystem services, from provisioning to cultural and societal, and they did an assessment, and they literally estimated that 90% of these ecosystem services are under severe degradation. And that's what underlies the Sustainable Development Goal, which is the action to go fix them. So there is a clear symbiosis that we came here to build, and to understand that humans and planet can only live if both live. We can live only if the planet lives and survives, and we absolutely need to take care and cherish it. So we're now moving from that knowledge to the understanding, to building a connection with our own planet, between human and home. And this is what people call the overview effect. And you asked, why space tourism? I think space tourism, yeah, for some it's more the fun, it's yet another level in the roller coaster and so on. But I think the more civil society flies into space and experiences this view of not looking from here to above, but looking from there back to our planet home, I think the more we're gonna develop, an empathic understanding of the fact that we're absolutely fundamentally connected with our home planet. So let's talk a little bit about the ideology behind this, right? So we're right now in the middle of a crisis, right? Not just the war crisis, but like the Millennium Assessment of, the fact that these systems are under degradation. The result of that is, so we see deforestation, right? We see climate change. We see a lot of waste. We don't know how to handle all the waste. We see a lot of pollution. We see a lot of CO2 emission. We're dependent on fossil fuel, and we know what that meant. And the fact that all these systems are under duress, it also reflects in terms of what we see today of democracy being under menace and retreat. And the underlying problem here is we want to continue the economic growth and the distribution of wealth around the globe, because if you have gradients of wealth around the globe, those maintain conflicts. So we really need to provide more balance across the globe, and true respect and action towards human rights, literally no matter where you're from on this planet. At the same time, and of course, economic growth puts a lot of stress on the resources. And if we want to continue along the path of economic growth, we need to continue to manufacture and have industries and have profits and so on, right? And of course, then, people say, well, how about the sustainable future? If we go for a sustainable future, then, the environment requires to stop the economic growth, right? Or the mechanism, or some of the mechanisms underlying economic growth. And how about if that results in a slowdown, what's going to happen? So I think right now, in terms of where our top leaders are, we're really in an ideological lock between economic growth and sustainable future. The way I see it, though, is that that's only true if we adopt this, or if we stay in this thinking of scarce and limited resources. And if we think of Earth as a closed system. And here's where the beauty of the space offer comes into play, because actually our planet is not a closed system. It is part of a bigger system, and we do have access from the surface of the planet into space. And space resources are pretty much unlimited. I mean, I don't know any other physical definition of unlimited unless we go to space. And so this is an opportunity to drive to an ideological unlock between economic growth and sustainable future, where we can do both: be sustainable, redistribute wealth, conserve natural resources, help rebalance the fundamental ecosystems that keep us human alive. And the sustainable development goals, and like I showed you in the beginning, the work of UNOSA, the sustainable development goals connected with space are fundamental in terms of leading us to an abundance and unlimited driven thinking. So let's talk a little bit about what we've seen to date. This economy, very true, has created, unfortunately, a lot of orbital debris. So now, question is, Yes, we humans are very wasteful, and it seems that in the first step we've taken this wasteful attitude into space. Was it negligent? I think it was. Was it deliberately negligent? I don't think so. But you know, the community, and there's so many investments in this area. The community has come around, and up to the level of the United Nations, there's sustainability for space. It's considered and treated very seriously today. There are so many companies working around the value chain, not only to detect these debris, but to analyze their composition. And then, you know, of course, the government investment continue to support this, to see how can we use now this orbital debris as a feedstock for manufacturing in space. First, you know, maybe components that we can assemble instead of assembling and manufacturing satellites at the surface of the Earth, taking them to space to operate. Maybe we can just take the minimum necessary thing from here and then leverage on this orbital debris as, you know, a new resource from space. We put it there, so now we better find a good solution to leverage on it instead of now deburning it into the atmosphere. And so again, there's many companies that are working along those lines. So here's where I talked to you a little bit before. The space economy, right, is several trillions, right? If we open up the bounds of a closed economics, you know, at the surface of the Earth, and we build, you know, first this infrastructure in low Earth orbit, and then from here we continue to expand into space. Now we can tap into resources either from meteorites or from the surface of the moon. So then, you know, this whole manufacturing, instead of taking and mining raw materials from the surface of the Earth, we can now use space raw materials to continue to feed into it. Is this going to happen tomorrow? No, absolutely not. But is this feasible plan to work around it? Do we have the technologies? Do we have the ability to turn what looks science fiction into reality? Absolutely. I mean, we've built the International Space Station in 150 years after there was a piece written in the Atlantic saying, oh, you know, it was quoted as a science fiction piece. So we know how to turn science fiction into reality. We're not breaking any physics here. So I already spoken to you about, you know, the pollution, just one example in terms of manufacturing, you know, wafers, right? And this is an integrated circuit on a 30-centimeter wafer. I think we're now down to 10 or so. So of course, you know, that amount of water has gone up. And so we always talk, you know, when we do these studies about the trends and threats and opportunities, right? So I spoke to you about solar power, and there are actually huge investments. Caltech actually has a center for what they call space solar power. We have companies, so that means harvesting solar power directly from space before it's being attenuated, because it goes through the atmosphere and capturing it at the surface of the planet. And I actually have a concern here that we're now so focused on building these huge fields of solar farms at the surface of the Earth with the expense of deforesting, but not having seriously considered a good balance between harvesting the energy from space and then beaming it down to Earth. So I'm really hoping that, you know, we're gonna find that right balance point, because before we go and we turn now renewable energy into the next fossil fuel drama. So I think that's really important to bring up. In terms of manufacturing, we do see today companies, of course, advanced additive manufacturing is, or 3D printing that we call it. It's not true 3D printing, because the only 3D printing part of it is the design phase. The printing itself phase, it's a layer by layer, so it's a gravity assist process. You wouldn't do that if you were to define this process in space. You would really, space and the lack of gravity, the lack of a preferential direction really offers the opportunity to do 3D printing, and that could be transformative the same way additive manufacturing was transformative across industries, terrestrial industries. So we have companies such as Made in Space, which is read by today, or TechShot, who have taken this kind of additive manufacturing machineries into space, either to print materials or to print tissues. And TechShot, in fact, they printed a neonatal heart. You can check that in the news. So this is really a massive and important shift in terms of thinking about the true sustainable manufacturing. And I know that you're wondering, well, why manufacturing? Actually, I think manufacturing is the third or the fourth largest contributor to current greenhouse gas emission and an important cause for climate change. So let me talk a little bit maybe about the microgravity environment, right? These changes that we see across materials and biological systems. And it really is very simple put, right? We always look at materials in terms of, okay, how they change when we change temperature, pressure, and that's what we call a phase diagram, right? Those of you who are old enough remember the fantastic shift in industry when the industry went to ultra low temperatures and ultra low temperature processing. So that was just discovering another point on the phase diagram. So what we're doing now is we're adding another axis here to this phase diagram with the gravity dependency. And we have a lot of information about 1G. And we started through decades of microgravity research and development on Skylab and ISS and all these stations in space. We started to build a new set of understanding, from protein crystal growth with larger crystals to immunology responses driven by by the T cells in your body, to literally survivability in space, right? The genetic tracing of the fact that when you're exposed to an unusual stressor, which is the space environment, there's all genes that have been turned off and they turn on in order to ensure that survival. And then you can talk about plants research. I'll skip this, but continuing on that timeline that I started on, right? We're now moving from data from space, which is the commodity that we're selling today, right? Images, satellite constellations, right? Internet from space and so on, into atoms from space, right? So the commodity now is making materials, making the next generation of fiber optics or of semiconductors into space and bringing those products back to Earth and making that shift towards in-space manufacturing. So, like I said, we have the ability to bring science fiction to reality. But let's not forget that the core here is that human-home relationship that we need to build on. And no matter what technologies we build, we should not forget that fundamentally we're human, right? And especially in this context, right? Mitchell, when he went on the moon and looked back at Earth, he said, you really want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck, drag him 250,000 miles out and say, look at that. So what we need in order to bring that science fiction to reality is peace. And that's what we should all focus on. So thank you so much for your attention. I'll take questions.